Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through Skyrim's most hidden, most overlooked, and most deeply atmospheric questlines. The ones most players never find, never finish, or walk right past without ever knowing what they missed. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next. And subscribe if this helps you sleep. The Lost Books of Atmora. There is a library at the top of the world. Most players who visit the College of Winterhold spend their time in the Hall of Attainment, maybe the Hall of Countenance, possibly the Arcanaeum if they need a book for a quest. They grab what they need, speak to whoever they have to speak to, and move on. Rarely do they stop at the front desk long enough to really look at the man behind it. Urag Gro Shub, the Orc librarian. He is sitting there every day, surrounded by ancient tomes in a college, perched at the edge of a cliff at the northeastern tip of a continent that is slowly falling into the sea, and he has been doing this for a very long time. If you take a moment to actually speak with him, not about a quest, not about a specific book, but just to ask him about the library itself, he will tell you that the Arcanaeum is one of the finest collections of scholarly texts in all of Tamriel. He says this without arrogance. He says it the way a man states a fact he has spent his whole life defending. Urag's questline begins quietly, as the best questlines in Skyrim always do. He simply asks if you would be willing to recover some books. Not monsters to kill, not ancient evils to stop. Books, specific books that have gone missing from the Arcanaeum's collection. Some stolen by bandits who thought the bindings were worth gold. Some lost in expeditions that never came back. Some sitting in the hands of people who had no idea what they were holding. He has a list. He wants them back. And if you agree to go looking, you begin one of the most quietly rewarding chains in the entire game. What makes this questline so easy to miss is that it has no dramatic hook. No courier runs up to you on the road. No mysterious stranger approaches you in a tavern. There is no urgent voice calling to you across the college courtyard. Urag just sits there at his desk, and most players blow past him entirely because they are on their way to something louder. The college has no shortage of loud things. Ankano's schemes, the Eye of Magnus, the catastrophe building in the Hall of the Elements. By comparison, a librarian asking you to fetch books sounds almost mundane. But these are not ordinary books. Among the titles Urag asks you to recover are volumes of deeply obscure lore, texts that most scholars in Tamriel have never seen, some that were believed lost centuries before the events of Skyrim. Several of the texts touch on the nature of the Dwemer, on the metaphysics of the Thu'um, on the precise, theological history of the Eight Divines. Others deal with the history of the college itself, with its founding during periods when the institution's survival was far from guaranteed, with the names and fates of archmages, whose achievements have been attributed to others. These are not adventure novels. They are primary sources, and the man asking you to retrieve them understands exactly what they are worth. Not in terms of coin, though some of them would command considerable coin, but in terms of what gets lost when such texts disappear. What gets lost is irreplaceable. That is the word Urag uses, in his blunt way. Irreplaceable. As in, once it is gone, that knowledge does not exist anywhere in the world anymore. The actual recovery work takes you to a variety of locations that range from merely dangerous to genuinely harrowing. One volume is in the possession of a court wizard who purchased it legitimately and has no particular interest in giving it up, which leads to a negotiation that tests your reputation and your patience in roughly equal measure. Another has ended up in a dungeon held by someone who found it during a raid and kept it without understanding what it was. A third requires navigating a situation where the book has become a kind of totem for people who believe it contains practical magical instructions rather than theoretical history. People who are, in the generous interpretation, misguided, and, in the less generous one, dangerous. Each recovery is different. Each one requires you to assess a situation and decide how to handle it. And the questline makes no particular attempt to tell you which approach is correct. Urag, when you bring him books, does not ask how you got them. He cares about the books. His ethics are the ethics of preservation. The text must survive, and the specifics of how that came about are secondary to the fact of its survival. There is something slightly uncomfortable about this if you think about it for long, and the questline is aware of that discomfort, letting it sit without resolution. Libraries throughout history have been built on books taken from people who did not want them taken. The Arcanium is not exempt from that history. What players who complete this questline eventually discover is that Urag's attachment to these books goes beyond professional pride. His dialogue, if you take the time to exhaust it, reveals a deep and genuine love of knowledge for its own sake. He came to the college not because he had nowhere else to go. Orcs are often seen as warriors and little else, and Urag is aware of this assumption. Occasionally comments on it with a sharpness that suggests he has spent considerable time defending his choices against people who thought he was in the wrong place. But because the Arcanium called to something in him that the world of battle never could, he has spent decades here. He has outlived several archmages. He has watched scholars come through these halls full of ambition, seen them get hurt by knowledge they reached for too fast, and watched the ones who survived become something remarkable. He is not a warm man. He is not exactly friendly, but he is, perhaps, the most devoted servant of knowledge in all of Skyrim. And the difference between devotion and warmth is something the questline asks you to sit with. There is a sub-quest tucked inside his broader recovery work that sends you after a specific set of books relating to the Eye of Magnus, the artifact that becomes central to the college's main quest line. If you pursue Urag's books alongside the main college story, rather than ignoring him entirely, you begin to realize that the information you are recovering has a direct bearing on what Ancano is trying to do. The books are not just historical curiosities. They are pieces of a puzzle, and Urag has been quietly trying to assemble that puzzle for longer than anyone realizes, based on what we know about how information functions in Tamriel's political and magical landscape. A scholar with access to everything that passes through the Arcanium is never truly neutral. They are a curator of power in its most foundational form. When you bring him enough books, and if you approach him in the right moments, Urag will sit and talk with you about what certain texts mean in context, about why a particular volume on Dwemer engineering represents a technological approach that every subsequent civilization has failed to replicate, about what a fragmentary First-Era political history reveals about the structural weaknesses that eventually destroyed the civilization it describes. These conversations are optional. They require patience. They reward it with the specific pleasure of learning something real from someone who knows what they are talking about. The questline ends not with a dramatic climax, but with an acknowledgement. Urag tells you, in his blunt and characteristically understated way, that you have done something worth doing. He may even, depending on how you have handled your interactions with him, offer you access to certain restricted texts in the Arcanium, material he does not share with most. It is, by any dramatic metric, an extremely quiet ending. But after hours of dragon bones and civil war politics and ancient Nordic tombs, there is something genuinely moving about being trusted with a library. The College of Winterhold Questline, on the surface, is about stopping a magical catastrophe. The Urag Questline underneath it is about remembering why we preserve things in the first place, not for power, not for prophecy. Because knowledge is its own reason, and some people understand that more clearly than others. There is also a dimension to this questline that the college's main story does not explore, and that only appears if you treat Urag as a full character, rather than a resource. He has opinions about the people you bring books from. He has opinions about the kinds of collectors who let historically significant texts sit on shelves they never open. He has opinions, carefully controlled but visible in certain moments, about the political forces that have been trying to suppress certain kinds of knowledge. The Thalmor's ongoing interference with scholarship that touches on Talos. The way certain imperial factions have historically managed which versions of Nordic history receive official recognition. The slow erosion of Dwemer studies that occurred after a specific political alliance decided the Dwemer's methods were too dangerous to teach. He sees all of this from his desk, from behind his books, from the institution that was built specifically to preserve what other forces prefer lost. He is not naive about how precarious that institution is. He is realistic about it in the way of someone who has watched things he worked to preserve disappear anyway. Not through dramatic theft, but through the ordinary attrition of institutions that lose funding and focus, and eventually the will to continue. If you have never gone back to speak with him, the next time you load up Skyrim, walk into the Arcanium and sit with him for a while. Ask him about the books. Ask him what he knows. He will not be warm about it, but he will tell you something real. There is one more layer to this quest line that most players never reach, because it requires an unusual patience. The patience of returning to a place after you have already been to it, after you already know what you found there, and looking again with different questions. When you bring Urag a particularly rare or significant volume, he does not simply shelve it. He reads it, and if you are still present when he looks up, he will tell you something about what he has read. These are not scripted lectures. They are the genuine responses of a reader encountering a text for what might be the first time, thinking aloud in the presence of someone who happened to be in the room. Some of what he shares is technical, the specific methodology of a first-era enchanting school, the engineering principles behind a Dwemer mechanism described in one of the texts, the precise bureaucratic structure of an institution that no longer exists. Some of it is interpretive. What a particular political history says about the conditions that make political histories necessary. What a theological treatise reveals about the anxieties of the era that produced it, rather than the beliefs it purports to describe. Urag reads between the lines because he has spent a lifetime reading lines that were designed to obscure rather than reveal. The Arcanium is full of texts that were written specifically to control how future generations understood the past. He knows this. He has spent decades developing the specific skill of reading what a text does not say and understanding why it chose not to say it. When he shares these readings with you, you are getting something that cannot be obtained anywhere else in Skyrim. The interpretation of someone who has read more than almost anyone alive and has spent the longest possible time thinking about what it means. There is also a political dimension to the Arcanium that Urag acknowledges only obliquely, in moments when he seems to forget to be careful. The College of Winterhold occupies a precarious position. It is the primary institution of magical research in Skyrim, during a period when the Thalmor have significant interest in controlling what kinds of scholarship proceed and what kinds do not. Certain texts in the Arcaneum deal directly with subjects the Thalmor consider dangerous. Histories of Talos that predate the Concordate's revision of such histories, theological works that treat the 8 divines in ways that include Talos, scholarship on the nature of the Thu'um that the Thalmor would prefer remain theoretical rather than practically demonstrated. Urag does not advertise that he is these texts. He does not mention them unless you have demonstrated through your actions in the questline that you are someone who understands what discretion means. What this reveals about the Arcaneum is that it is not simply a collection of knowledge, but an act of resistance. Quiet, institutional, deniable, but real. The preservation of texts that powerful forces want destroyed is a political act, whether you call it that or not. Urag has made his library into a form of sanctuary for ideas that the current political climate would prefer not to survive. He does not frame it this way. He frames it as doing his job, but the job, understood fully, includes protecting certain things from the people who would take them. The books he asks you to recover, when placed in this context, take on an additional significance. He is not simply restoring a collection. He is defending it against the attrition that ideological pressure produces. The way important things disappear, not through dramatic confiscation, but through slow dispersal, through benign neglect, through the gradual accumulation of individual decisions that none of them feel significant, and that together amount to erasure. The bandit with the stolen book did not know what he had. The collector who bought it from him probably did not know what he had either. And if Urag does not track it down and bring it home, it eventually ends up in a place where nobody will ever know to look for it. And then the knowledge in it exists only in memory. And then whoever held that memory dies. And then the knowledge simply does not exist anymore. That is what Urag is fighting against. Not enemies with faces, just time and dispersal, and the ordinary human tendency to forget what we did not personally know. He has been losing this fight for most of his life. He has been fighting it anyway. The dragon who chose otherwise. There is a moment in Skyrim's main story when the Blades, your supposed ancient allies, ask you to do something unconscionable. They ask you to kill Paarthurnax. Most players know this. It is, in terms of moral controversy, one of the most discussed decisions in the game. Do you side with the Greybeards and their ancient master? Or do you honor the Blade's demand and execute the dragon who has spent centuries meditating on the Thu'um at the top of the throat of the world? What most players do not know is that refusing to kill Paarthurnax and then returning to speak with him after Alduin's defeat unlocks a series of conversations with the old dragon that reveals an extraordinary depth of lore about the nature of dragonkind, the history of the Dragon War, and what it actually means to choose a different path when your nature is supposed to be fixed. Paarthurnax is old in a way that the word old does not quite capture. He was present during the Dragon War. He was one of Alduin's lieutenants, and the things he helped Alduin do to the men and women of ancient Skyrim are part of the historical record in a way that cannot be minimized. He acknowledges this if you press him. He does not minimize it. He says, with the specific patience of someone who has spent centuries metabolizing guilt, that he is what he is because of what he was, and that both of those things are true at the same time. He calls his choice the decision to turn away from Alduin's domination and seek a different path through the Greybeard's teachings. The hardest thing he has ever done. Not the most dangerous, the hardest. If you complete the main quest line without killing Paarthurnax and then return to speak with him afterward, His dialogue opens up in ways that most players never experience. He speaks to you not as a quest giver or a cryptic oracle dispensing prophecy, but as someone who has been waiting a very long time to talk honestly with a person who might understand what he has been through. The conversations range across vast territory. He speaks about the time before, the Dragon War, about the culture that existed among dragonkind when Alduin ruled, about what it felt like to serve a master who embodied domination so completely that it reshaped reality around him. He speaks about the day he began to change, the growing awareness that what he had always believed was power was actually something closer to a cage with very good aesthetics. What makes these conversations qualify as hidden content is that they only occur if you have refused to kill Paarthurnax and return to the throat of the world after completing the main story. Most players never come back. They defeat Alduin in Sovngarde, return to Skyrim to the cheers of assembled dragons, hear Paarthurnax's epilogue speech, his declaration that he intends to bring the way of the voice to the surviving Dover scattered across Skyrim, and then move on to other things. The game does not push you back up the mountain. There is no quest marker, no courier, no signal that more is waiting. But if you return to him and exhaust his dialogue, Paarthurnax speaks with an openness that the main story's urgency never allowed. He speaks about the way of the voice not as a philosophical abstraction, but as something he has spent 800 years trying to embody and is not certain he has fully succeeded at. He's been meditating at that summit with the greybeards below him and the sky above him for longer than most human civilizations have existed. He describes that time not as peaceful, but as difficult, as the continuous work of choosing differently than his nature demands, every day, without anyone to verify whether it is working. After Alduin's defeat, Odahviing, in the epilogue sequence, says something significant about Paarthurnax's intention. He expresses doubt that many surviving dragons will wish to exchange Alduin's dominion for what he calls the tyranny of Paarthurnax's way of the voice. This gives texture to what Paarthurnax is undertaking. He is not simply proposing something gentle. He is proposing a complete reorganization of dragon existence around something other than domination. And Odahviing's skepticism captures what Paarthurnax is up against. The nature of dragonkind is not easily bent. The dragons scattered across Skyrim's peaks and crags are what they have always been, and changing that is likely a project measured in centuries, if it is possible at all. What Paarthurnax says, if you return to him, is that possibility is not nothing, and that nothing is where you start when you want to build something. What this extended dialogue does, functionally, is give weight to the decision not to kill Paarthurnax. Without it, that decision is primarily emotional. You spare him because it feels wrong to execute an ancient being who chose a different path. With these conversations available to you, the decision becomes consequential in a broader sense. Paarthurnax is not just a wise old dragon at the top of a mountain. He is the beginning of something, a philosophy, a long attempt to change what dragons mean to the people of Tamriel. Killing him, as the Blades demanded, would have ended that before it had truly started, and the Blades, in their institutional certainty, would have eliminated the possibility along with the dragon. Most players never see any of this because most players either comply with the Blades or they finish the main story and consider the game complete. The idea that the most important thing you can do is go back to a character you already knew about and talk instead of moving forward runs against the current of how most people play Skyrim. The game rewards motion. It rewards new places and new fights. It rarely signals that sitting at the top of the throat of the world and listening might be the most worthwhile thing available. There is also a thread in this questline that touches on the nature of the Thu'um itself, on what the voice means to dragons, who experience it not as a learned skill, but as an expression of their fundamental self. When Paarthurnax speaks to you about how he changed, he does not describe the change as suppressing his nature. He describes it as discovering a different application of the same nature. The Thu'um in his telling does not have to mean domination. The power that Alduin used to crush resistance is the same power the Greybeards have spent centuries learning to hold in stillness. The difference is not the power, but the direction of will behind it. This is not a reassuring philosophy for those who prefer power to come with simple instructions. It is, however, the most sophisticated treatment of what the voice actually is that the game offers, and it only appears at the top of the throat of the world, in conversations that most players never have. But then, that is exactly what the Greybeards have always taught. There is a part of this questline that takes place entirely in Paarthurnax's silences, and it is worth spending time there. When you ask him about the Dragon War, about the specific events, the specific acts he was part of, he does not deflect or minimize. He gives you the history as he lived it. He was not a minor participant. He was effective, and the things his effectiveness accomplished were terrible. The men and women of early Skyrim who suffered under Alduin's dominion suffered in ways that Paarthurnax helped make possible. He knows this. He has known it for every year of his long meditation, and he has not resolved it into something comfortable. What he has done is hold it without resolution, carry the truth of it alongside the truth of what he is now, and allow both to be true simultaneously, without demanding that one cancel the other. This is, it turns out, an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. The questline implies, through dialogue fragments that appear only if you return to the summit multiple times across different in-game days, that Paarthurnax has occasionally failed at it, that there have been centuries when the weight of what he did was not balanced by the weight of what he chose, and that those centuries were something between very difficult and something that doesn't have a human name. He does not request sympathy. He reports this the way a geographer reports terrain, as relevant information about the landscape of what his existence has been. The Blades, it should be said, are not wrong about what Paarthurnax did. Delphine and Esben are not inventing or exaggerating. They are correct about the historical record. What they are wrong about, and what the questline, if you follow it fully, makes clear they are wrong about, is their implicit assumption that the historical record is the complete record, that what a being was is the totality of what it is, that guilt is transferred cleanly across centuries of different choices and is not diminished by those choices in any way. The Blades' ethics are the ethics of the ledger, the ethics of accounts that must balance, and they are not entirely without value. But ledger ethics fail in the presence of something that has been doing the opposite for 800 years, and the questline asks you to notice where that failure occurs. There is a conversation with Paarthurnax, available in this questline, about the nature of the Thu'um and what it means to the people who use it most completely, the dragons, for whom the voice is not something learned but something they are. He distinguishes between the formal understanding of the Thu'um as a collection of words and the deeper experience of it as a relationship between self and the world that speaking involves. He says that when a dragon shouts, they are not deploying a weapon, they are declaring their nature, inserting their fundamental self into the fabric of what is. When the Greybeards go silent, he says, it is not absence. It is the same act performed in reverse. withdrawing themselves from the world's fabric to listen to what the world is saying when they are not adding their own noise to it. He suggests that the Dragonborn, who can do both, is interesting in a way he did not fully anticipate, not simply because of the power involved, but because of what it means to have a nature that is simultaneously human and draconic, and to have to make choices about which mode you are operating in at any given moment. He wonders aloud whether the split might be generative rather than simply conflicted, whether someone who holds two natures without resolving them might see things that a being with one nature cannot. He does not answer this. He has been thinking about it for as long as you have been Dragonborn, which is not very long compared to how long he has been thinking about other things, and he is not yet sure. The highest point of the throat of the world, where these conversations can happen after the main quest concludes, is a place where the wind comes from directions that do not make geographical sense, where the sky is close enough to touch on clear days and invisible on others. The etched inscriptions on the word wall carry meanings that resonate differently once Paarthurnax has taught you something about how meaning works in the Thu'um. The whole summit feels like a place that has been inhabited by something patient for a very long time, and the patience has become part of the architecture. There is also a thread in these conversations that touches on the nature of the Thu'um itself, on what the voice means to dragons who experience it not as a learned skill, but as an expression of their fundamental self. When Paarthurnax speaks about how he changed, he does not describe the change as suppressing his nature. He describes it as discovering a different application of the same nature. The Thu'um, in his telling, does not have to mean domination. The power that Alduin used to crush resistance is the same power the Greybeards have spent centuries learning to hold in stillness. The difference is not the power, but the direction of will behind it. This is not a reassuring philosophy for those who prefer power to come with simple instructions. It is, however, the most sophisticated treatment of what the voice actually is that the game offers, and it only appears at the top of the throat of the world in conversations that most players never have. Most players see the throat of the world once, for the main quest, climbing the 7,000 steps, meeting Paarthurnax for the first time, learning what they came to learn. The conversations available through sparing him and returning ask you to come back, to climb the steps again, to sit with the old dragon and ask more questions than the main story gave you room to ask. What the summit holds for players willing to make the return trip is one of the most considered portrayals of guilt and change, and the long, difficult work of becoming something different than you were. In a game mostly about shouting ancient words at things until they die. Forbidden Legend, there is a specific kind of quiet that ancient Nordic barrows have, different from the quiet of other places in Skyrim. It is a preserved quiet, as if the air inside these tombs has been undisturbed for so long, it has forgotten how to move. The Draga breathe in it anyway. The fires in the sconces burn without oxygen anyone can explain, and deep in certain barrows, especially the ones connected to this quest line, the weight of very old decisions presses in from all sides. The Forbidden Legend questline is one of the most beautifully constructed pieces of storytelling in Skyrim, and it is routinely overlooked because it has no natural entry point that most players encounter organically. You can begin it in 3 different ways: finding the book Lost Legends in general loot, or on bookshelves across Skyrim, stumbling onto one of the 3 connected dungeon locations, or in what is perhaps the most atmospheric introduction possible, wandering into the Folgunthur dungeon in the marshland west of Solitude and finding it in the form of a dead scholar and his abandoned journal. Most players who find it this last way. By accident, following a road they did not need to follow, entering a dungeon they had no particular reason to enter. The story at the center of this questline is ancient, and it is about a father and his 3 sons. Galdr was a powerful wizard who lived during the First Era, in the time of High King Harold. He was, by the accounts that survive, genuinely remarkable. A mage of extraordinary skill whose abilities drew the attention and admiration of kings. He served the High King faithfully and was known throughout the land as a man of wisdom and good counsel. His amulet, a masterwork of enchanting that concentrated magical power in a manner that even modern scholars find difficult to replicate, was known to be the primary source of his strength. The truth which the questline reveals gradually is that Galdr's power and the amulet's power had become so entangled over decades of use that separating one from the other was probably impossible. The man and the artifact had grown into each other in the way that very powerful magical objects sometimes do with very capable practitioners who carried them long enough. He had 3 sons, Jirik, Mikrul, and Sigdis, when Galdr died, murdered by those sons, according to the lore that survives. His amulet was split 3 ways, and then his sons destroyed themselves trying to keep it. That sentence does not do justice to what actually happened. The murder of Galdr was not sudden. His sons had watched him for years, had grown up in the shadow of his power and his reputation, had come to resent the way the world oriented itself toward their father while treating them as footnotes. Together, they conspired to take the amulet. The violence that followed the murder was not a battle so much as a rapid catastrophic collapse of whatever bonds of brotherhood the 3 had maintained. By the time it ended, all 4 of them were dead. The father by his sons, and the sons by each other, and by the consequences of a power they had acquired before they could use it. The court of High King Harold, in the aftermath of this massacre, made a decision that was as practical as it was terrible. They ordered the story suppressed, not merely quieted, actively erased. The Archmage Gaemund, who seems to have understood most clearly what had happened and what it meant, was tasked with burying the 3 brothers in separate locations across Skyrim, in tombs sealed well enough that their spirits could not find each other across death. The amulet was broken into 3 pieces and buried with them, 1 fragment per tomb, ensuring that even if the seals eventually weakened, no single spirit would have access to the full artifact. Then the history books were rewritten, Galdr's name removed, his deeds attributed to others, his sons reduced to unnamed footnotes in a story that was itself reduced to a footnote in a story about something else entirely. For nearly 1,000 years, this family simply did not exist in the historical record. What makes the quest line extraordinary is how it distributes this history across the 3 dungeon locations you must visit. Folgunthur, in the marshes southwest of Solitude, holds Mikrul, the youngest brother, and based on what the dungeon implies, the one most given to direct force rather than strategy. The approach to Folgunthur through the marsh, with its standing stones and ambient sounds of wind through reeds, has a melancholy quality that fits perfectly. This was a place chosen for a burial that the buriers hoped nobody would ever find. Sarthal, the excavation site where the College of Winterhold conducts its archaeological work, holds Jirik. And this is significant because Sarthal is also the site of one of the college's main questline chapters. Players who follow the college's story will have been in Sarthal will have fought their way through its ancient chambers without ever knowing that 50 feet away in a sealed chamber, the first murderer in this family drama has been waiting in the dark. The juxtaposition is striking. Scholars attempting to understand the First Era, working directly above one of its most violent secrets. Geirmund's Hall, on an island in a lake east of Ivarstead, holds Sigdis, the middle brother, and in many ways the most complex figure in the questline. The hall is named after the Archmage who built it and sealed himself inside, which is extraordinary. Geirmund did not simply build a prison for Sigdis and leave. He stayed. His reasons are not fully explained, but the ghost you encounter in the depths of his own construction suggests a man who felt personally responsible for all of it, for whatever warnings he might have given too late, for the political decision to suppress the truth, for the act of sealing a man in stone when that man had, at minimum, inherited a situation as much as created it. Geirmund stayed because walking away felt like an acceptable option to everyone else, and he could not find a way to make it feel acceptable to him. Each dungeon fight is mechanically distinct. Mikrul commands Draga with unusual organization and effectiveness, as if his will persists through centuries of death with enough force to animate his soldiers beyond their ordinary capacity. Jirik in Sarthal uses the environment as a weapon in a way that suggests his power was always about leverage rather than direct force. He is shielded by magic tied to the eye of Magnus, and fighting him requires interrupting that connection rather than overpowering him directly. Sigdis in Geirmund's Hall creates copies of himself, a fragmented self-image made literal, a man who became so many things in his attempts to survive and outlast his brothers that he lost track of which version was the original. When you bring all three fragments to Reachwater Rock, which does not appear on your map until you have all three pieces, suggesting that the location itself was sealed from discovery until the moment of convergence, the questline arrives at its final confrontation. The three brothers reform themselves one last time. Each fight echoes the mechanics of their original dungeons but intensified, as if dying has made them more purely themselves. And when all three have been ended again, Galder himself appears. His ghost does not fight you. He stands in the chamber where his children have just been destroyed for the second time, and he looks at you, and the look contains something that is not quite grief, and not quite relief, and not quite anything else that has a clean name. He restores the amulet, assembles the three pieces in your hands, makes it whole again, the same object that his sons destroyed each other to possess. And then he is simply gone. No explanation, no final speech. The debt has been settled, and the father has done the last thing he could do. Players who have found this questline and followed it to its end rarely talk about the amulet. They talk about Geirmund. They talk about the detail that the man who sealed three princes in stone stayed in the stone with one of them, and what that staying meant, and what it cost to feel responsible for something that cannot be undone. There is also something worth noting about the questline's treatment of the suppression itself. The court of High King Harald did not simply choose to bury this story out of cowardice or malice. They buried it because the alternative was a public reckoning with the idea that one of Skyrim's most respected mages had raised three sons, who killed him for his power, and then killed each other, and that the only moral response to this was to erase all four of them from history and hope the tombs held. The suppression was an act of social preservation, as much as political management. Some truths, the questline implies, are buried not because they are shameful, but because the people who made them happen could not figure out any other way to keep living in the world that came after. Suppressed history does not disappear. It waits in barrows, It waits in the specific weight of dark air in chambers built to contain secrets. It waits until someone walks in and starts asking the questions that nobody wanted asked. And then it turns out it has been waiting all along. There is a texture to the Forbidden Legends world that becomes visible only when you have completed all 3 dungeons and understand the full shape of what happened. Go back to Folgunther after the quest has concluded and walk through it knowing what you now know. The layout of the dungeon, the specific arrangement of its chambers, the placement of its traps, the geometry of the approach becomes legible as a design. Someone built this to contain Mikrul, and they built it knowing that Mikrul would be hostile and would command Draga with unusual effectiveness, and that the standard Norse burial architecture would need to be modified to account for a spirit that was not simply dead, but actively, persistently present in the way of something that died angry. The modifications are visible if you look for them. Certain passages are sealed in ways that ordinary Nordic barrows are not sealed. Certain chambers have structural elements that serve containment rather than dignity. Sarthel's relationship to the questline has a dimension worth dwelling on. The College of Winterhold excavates Sarthel because they believe it holds answers about the First Era. They are correct, but not in the way they expect. The answers buried in Sarthel are not about Nordic history in the general sense. They are about a specific family, a specific set of murders, and the specific political decision to bury the family alongside the murders. When you clear Sarthel as part of the college questline and encounter Jirik without knowing his story, he is simply a powerful boss in a dungeon. When you encounter him knowing his story, knowing that this is the eldest brother, the one who struck first and set the collapse in motion, the fight is different. Not mechanically different. Different in weight. You are not clearing a dungeon. You are bringing the second death that was held at bay for 1,000 years by good stonework. Geirmund's Hall is the questline's final dungeon, and in several ways, its most melancholy. The island setting, accessible only by swimming or an improvised crossing, creates a sense of deliberate isolation that the dungeon's interior maintains. Geirmund built this place knowing he was going to seal himself inside it, knowing that when he sealed it, he was sealing himself into a tomb alongside the man he had imprisoned. This was not an accident of the construction process. He chose it, and the choice suggests that guilt, for Geirmund, was not a thing to be processed and moved past, but something that required continuous presence. That staying was itself the appropriate response to having been involved at whatever remove, in a situation that ended with 4 people dead and a family's name expunged from history. Sigdis, the spirit imprisoned in Geirmund's Hall, reflects his jailer in interesting ways. He creates copies, phantom versions of himself that fight alongside the original, forcing you to identify the real target among reflections. This is the signature of someone who spent a lifetime being multiple things. The capable middle brother, the secondary claimant, the man who outlasted Jirik's aggression only to find himself inheriting a situation that had no good position, and who, in death, can no longer hold those multiplicities together as anything except confusion. He is fragmented. He knows he is fragmented. The fight to determine which of him is real is not just a mechanical puzzle. It is a portrait of someone who stopped knowing that answer before they died. The Gulder amulet itself, reconstructed at Reachwater Rock, is one of the more powerful enchanted items in the game. It grants bonuses to health, magicka, and stamina simultaneously. a balance that reflects what the original artifact appears to have been about, a kind of equilibrium of capacities, a making whole rather than an amplification of any single dimension. Galder built it to be complete. His sons destroyed its completeness before any of them could benefit from what it actually was. The reconstructed version you receive at the Questline's end is the thing it was always supposed to be, and you receive it from a father's ghost who is doing, in death, the only repair still available to him. Players who complete this questline and then look up its historical context in Skyrim's broader lore often find that the suppression was more thorough than the questline itself suggests. There are almost no references to Galder in texts that were written after the suppression. A few scholars in various Elder Scrolls games have noted the absence. The gap in the historical record where an important first-era mage should be. The way certain credited achievements in later texts have the specific quality of things that were attributed elsewhere because their original source had been removed. The questline, once you understand it, makes those absences visible in a way they were not before. Everywhere Galder is not mentioned is another place where the court of High King Harold successfully did what they set out to do. The only reason the questline exists at all, the only reason the story is recoverable, is that a scholar named Danis Valen refused to accept the absence. He spent years tracking the fragmented evidence, following the same thread that the questline follows, and died in Fulgunther's entrance, attempting to proceed further than the dungeon allowed him to go. His journal is what starts you on the path. He got as far as he could and died, and the story continues because someone else walks in behind him. This is how a lot of suppressed history gets recovered, in Tamriel and elsewhere. Someone follows a thread until they can't anymore, and leaves enough of a trail that someone else can pick it up. A night to remember. The questline begins in a tavern, as so many stories do. You are approached by a man named Sam Gaven, who appears in whichever inn you happen to be visiting. He spawns in response to your presence, and if you never linger long enough in the right establishment at the right time, you simply never meet him. He is charming in the deliberately excessive way of someone who has had centuries to practice being charming in taverns. He has a staff at his side and an energy about him that does not quite match the dusty wooden room around him. The energy of someone who knows something the rest of the room does not know and finds this privately delightful. He challenges you to a drinking contest. The drinks are free. He seems friendly. You say yes. You wake up somewhere else. This is the first thing you know. You are not where you were. You are in the temple of Dibella in Markarth, and the priestesses are deeply unhappy to see you, and you have no clear memory of how you arrived. There is a goat on the premises. The priestesses are not commenting on the goat, but the goat is very much there. Around you are clues, a journal fragment, a piece of conversation, a note you apparently left yourself in handwriting that is yours but messier than usual. That point vaguely toward what happened during the hours between the drinking contest and this moment. You have evidently been on quite a journey. The structure of A Night to Remember is reconstruction. You are not moving forward through a story. You are moving backward through one, assembling the events of a night you cannot remember from the wreckage it left behind across multiple holds. You were in Rorikstead at some point. Several farmers are, putting it with maximum charity, agitated at the sight of you, and there is a wedding ring in your pocket associated with a name you cannot quite place. You apparently made promises in Whiterun that you do not remember making, to someone who absolutely remembers you making them. There is the staff you were using when the evening began, which you apparently lost, and finding it means following a trail of damage and embarrassed NPCs across the map. The writing in the NPC reactions and journal fragments is precise in a way that Skyrim's humour does not always manage. The comedy of A Night to Remember escalates in exact proportion to what is revealed. Each new location tells you something worse than the last, and the cumulative picture of what happened. What you, the Dragonborn, the person prophesied to defeat the World Eater, apparently got up to on one free evening when someone offered you a round, is genuinely funny in a way that depends on the game having previously established you as a serious, capable person. The contrast does the work. The more gravely you have been approaching Skyrim's various apocalypses, the more effective the slapstick becomes. There is, as mentioned, a giant involved at some point. If you do not know the specific context in which a giant becomes relevant to a story about one night of drinking, that is a pleasure that awaits you on your next playthrough. The questline has a second register that is easy to miss if you are moving through it for the laughs. Sam Given is not a man. He is Sanguine, the Daedric prince of debauchery, excess, and the varieties of behavior that social order would prefer not to acknowledge. Most of the Daedric shrine quests in Skyrim involve the prince revealing themselves at the end, and A Night to Remember is no different in that structural beat. But the specific nature of what Sanguine represents, and the form his test took, is more interesting than a simple prank. He is not malicious in the way Molag is malicious, or strategically cruel in the way Mephala is cruel. He chose to befriend you for an evening and then let you discover what you were capable of when every normal social inhibition dissolved. The chaos you left behind across Skyrim is, in his philosophical framework, evidence of something alive in you, the part of a person that exists before duty and after calculation. His reward to you, the Sanguine Rose, is a staff that summons a Atmora. Practical, direct. The manner in which he presents it at the questline's conclusion is instructive. He appears not with menace or grandeur, but with the warm satisfaction of someone who genuinely enjoyed the evening. He says you are good company. He means it. This suggests something about A Night to Remember that separates it from the game's other Daedric quests. It was not a test of your worth or a manipulation of your weakness. It was, from Sanguine's perspective, a very good night out with an interesting person. And the Sanguine Rose is less a divine reward and more a thank you gift. Several of the people you apparently interacted with during the lost evening have things to say if you return to them later. The priestesses of Dibella are, depending on what exactly happened in their temple, either still furious or cautiously willing to pretend nothing occurred. The situation in Rorikstead involving the wedding ring has a resolution that is either quietly heartwarming or gently melancholy, depending on how the game has assembled the specifics for your playthrough. Some things that happened that night remain unclear even after you have assembled all the evidence, which is perhaps the most realistic detail in a questline about lost memory. The questline also, in a way that players who rush it miss entirely, is a quiet meditation on identity. You are the Dragonborn. You have been carrying the weight of that identity, the prophecy, the responsibility, the specific loneliness of being the person the world needs. For however long your playthrough has lasted, A Night to Remember is Sanguine's way of asking, who are you when none of that matters? When there is no dragon to kill and no Jarl to impress, and nobody watching except a Daedric prince who finds you interesting regardless of your title. The chaos you leave behind is not presented as a failure or a lapse. It is presented as evidence that you are more than the role you have been given. That there is a person underneath the Dragonborn who still responds to a stranger's invitation for a drink with exactly the kind of uncomplicated yes that makes for a very good evening. Sam Gaven waits in the taverns of Skyrim, appearing in specific inns at specific times, challenging travellers to drinking contests. He's been doing this for a very long time. He asks only that you sit down with him and see what happens when the evening takes over. There is a specific texture to the Questlines' reconstruction structure that rewards attention. The notes and journals and startled NPC reactions you encounter as you work backward through the night are not presented in chronological order, and this is deliberate. You get the end of an incident before you understand its beginning. You learn what happened in Rorikstead before you understand why you were in Rorikstead, and the explanation, when you eventually piece it together, recontextualizes everything about the Rorikstead incident in a way that shifts it from baffling to completely logical, which somehow makes it funnier. The questline trusts you to hold fragments without demanding immediate sense of them, and the payoff for that patience is that each new piece of information is more satisfying than it would have been if delivered in sequence. There are also specific details in this questline that change depending on the order in which you discover them. If you arrive at Markarth before you have any context for why you are in Markarth, the priestess's reaction to you carries a specific quality of cold outrage with no explanation behind it. The quality of people who know exactly what you did and are waiting for you to acknowledge it, which you cannot do because you do not know. Their restraint in the face of your apparent amnesia is itself a piece of characterization, suggesting that the Temple of Dibella has developed specific protocols for handling situations of this kind, which implies that situations of this kind, mortal adventurers in over their heads with Daedric princes, occur with enough frequency to necessitate protocols. Sanguine's fingerprints are on the entire questline in ways that are easy to miss if you are focused on the forward motion of finding your next destination. The people whose lives you apparently disrupted during the lost night share a certain quality. They are all, in their subsequent reactions, dealing with something that forced them out of their ordinary patterns and produced results they did not expect and are not entirely sure were bad. The farmer in Rorikstead, who is agitated at your return, is agitated in the specific way of someone who had an unexpectedly good time and is not prepared to admit it. The people in Whiterun who remember you making promises are not uniformly angry. Some of them received something from the exchange, even if they received it in a manner they were not expecting. Sanguine is not a destructive force by preference. He is a generative one. The chaos he creates tends to leave people with experiences they could not have manufactured for themselves. And the questline, if you read it carefully, is as much about what the Lost Night gave people as what it took. The temple in Rorikstead, and what specifically occurred there with the wedding ring, has a resolution that the questline handles with unusual care. There is a real person whose life intersected with yours during those missing hours, and the questline requires you to address that intersection in a way that acknowledges its seriousness even within the comic frame. Sanguine's questline could have made every resolution a punchline. It makes some of them something closer to a quiet moment inside the comedy, which is where A Night to Remember does its best work. The comedy is the surface. Underneath it is a questline that is genuinely interested in what happens to people when the ordinary social rules that govern their behavior are suspended for a few hours by a Daedric prince with excellent taste in beverages. The staff itself, the Sanguine Rose, is worth a moment of consideration. It is a powerful artifact, and its practical applications are significant, but its origin is worth holding on to as you use it. This is the gift that the Prince of Debauchery chose to give the Dragonborn after a night that, from his perspective, was simply a very good time with an interesting person. He could have given you anything. He gave you a tool for summoning something that fights at your side. There is something almost touching in this, coming from a Daedric prince who is, structurally, entirely about indulgence and excess. The gift of company. The practical gift of something that goes with you and fights when fighting is needed. He likes spending the evening with you, and the sanguine rose is, in its oblique way, a memento of that. The questline has a second ending that most players do not see, because it occurs much later in the game, and it is completely unmarked. If you return to whichever inn you first met Sam Gaven in, and you visit it at the right time of day, he is there again. He is at the same table. He has the same staff. He raises his drink when he sees you, with the specific warmth of someone who genuinely enjoyed your company and would be very happy to see what happened this time. You can say no. The game offers you the option to simply decline the drinking contest, to not repeat the experience, to prefer the certain knowledge of where you will wake up tomorrow over the uncertain knowledge of what a very good night out with a Daedric prince might produce. The dialogue in that refusal is understated and slightly wistful. Sanguine says that is entirely your choice, and he respects it completely. And then he vanishes before you can quite register what you declined, or you can say yes. And what happens after that is not recorded anywhere in this script, because whatever it is yours. The Book of Love. There is a quest line in Skyrim that takes you across the entire map for the purpose of mending broken hearts. It begins in Riften, in the Temple of Mara. This is somewhat ironic, because Riften is not a city that inspires faith in love. It is a city of corruption and careful distrust. Its citizens perpetually guarded, its canals running dark above a criminal underworld that everyone knows exists, but most prefer not to name. The Thieves Guild operates openly enough that its members drink in the ragged flagon, while guards who know exactly where they are look in another direction. Maven Blackbriar moves through the city's markets and taverns with the specific ease of someone who owns most of what she passes through. Riften is in its way beautiful. The canals, the wooden architecture, the way the city is built into and around its canal system. But it is the beauty of a place that has made its peace with its own compromises. The Temple of Mara sits in this city like a small warm light in a cold room, and Maramal the priest will marry you to another character if you ask him the right questions. But it is his assistant, Dinya Balu, who holds the thread that leads into this quest line. She receives visions, specific, clear visions from Mara herself, instructions rather than impressions. She has been waiting for the right person to carry them out. She needs someone to deliver 3 love offerings across Skyrim, to intervene in 3 situations where love has become tangled, and to help untangle them as Mara would want them untangled. The first stop is Avarstead, a village at the base of the mountain that leads to High Hrothgar. The situation you find there involves a young woman named Fastred, who loves an outlander named Bassianus Axius. Her father Jofthor is opposed to the match. His resistance is comprehensible on all sides, which is part of what makes it genuinely challenging. He loves his daughter. He's afraid of losing her to the road, to the world beyond the village, to the general tendency of outlanders to eventually return to wherever they came from and take the people who followed them. He has watched Ivarstead's population dwindle. He has seen too many young people leave. His resistance is not cruelty, it is fear, which is sometimes worse. What the quest line asks you to do in Ivarstead is not simply convince Fastred's father to accept her choice. It is more careful than that. It asks you to find the path that leaves everyone as intact as possible, to take the time to understand what each person in the situation actually needs, which is not always what they say they want. If you simply tell Fastrid to leave without addressing her father's grief, the game allows it, but Jofthor's subsequent dialogue makes clear that something has been broken rather than mended. Mara's questline is more precise than that. It asks you to find the resolution that heals rather than simply resolves, and those are different things. The second stop is Markarth. But the love you are sent to address there is not tragic. It is quietly human. Calcelmo, the city's Dwemer scholar and court wizard, has spent his life surrounded by ancient stone mechanisms and the intellectual pleasures of archaeology, and he has found himself entirely unable to communicate a fairly simple feeling to Feline, the Jarl's housecarl. He loves her and cannot say so. The questline asks you to serve as intermediary, discovering through her friend Ingvar that she has a fondness for poetry, procuring a poem for a sum of 200 septims, delivering it under Calcelmo's name, and watching the awkward and touching thing that follows. It is not grand. It is the specific comedy and sweetness of someone who can decipher a dead civilization's language, but cannot articulate his own feelings to someone standing 10 feet away. The third and final stop moves you away from cities entirely, out into the open plains near Guka's monument, southeast of Rorikstead, where an ancient battle was fought, and where its dead have not entirely left. The people you are going to help are Ruki and Fenrig, and they are both ghosts. They are spirits who have refused to pass on because each one is waiting to know what happened to the other. Ruki died in the battle's aftermath, and her spirit lingers at the monument, unable to leave, searching among the old ruins for a body she cannot find. Fenrig was killed before the battle even began, ambushed nearby while the army camped for the night, and his spirit waits in the open plain east of the monument, unable to leave. They are, in the most literal possible sense, keeping each other in the world by refusing to go without the other, and neither of them knows the other is doing the same thing. Finding Fenrig requires walking east from the monument into open plain. Not far, but far enough. He is simply there, waiting. He does not know how long he has been waiting. Time moves differently for the dead. You tell him about Ruki. Something happens in his expression that the game engine cannot quite render, but that the voice acting suggests clearly relief and grief, and the specific gratitude that only comes when you have been afraid of something for a very long time, and that something turns out to be okay. You escort him back to Ruki. The reunion is brief. They see each other. They say each other's names. And then they are gone, together, in the way they could not go alone. It is one of the shortest scenes in the game. It is one of the ones that seems to stay with players the longest. There is something in the simplicity of it. Two people who loved each other, refusing to leave without each other, finally allowed to leave together. That transcends the mechanics of what you have done to bring it about. You walked across open country to find a ghost. You walked back with that ghost at your side. Nothing dramatic occurred. Two dead people who loved each other got to say goodbye and then got to go. That is all. The Book of Love is the quietest questline in Skyrim, possibly the quietest in any Elder Scrolls game. There is no meaningful combat. It does not unearth ancient conspiracies or confront world-ending forces. It asks you to walk slowly through the world and pay attention to the people in it, and to act carefully in situations where acting carelessly would be easy. Most players find this quest line in the early game while being pulled toward a dozen louder things. The Thieves' Guild, the main story, the Civil War, the Dark Brotherhood summons. They put it off until later and then forget about it entirely. This is understandable. It is also a loss worth naming. The Book of Love does something that most of Skyrim's content does not do. It treats love as a serious subject, not in the romantic or mechanical sense, but in the specific sense that love is the thing that makes people do unreasonable things for good reasons. Fastred's father would rather lose her than see her hurt. Ruki refused peace until she knew Fenrig was at peace. These are not decorative emotions. They are the load-bearing architecture of lives, and the questline treats them with the gravity they deserve. Mara's temple in Riften has a sign above the door that says love is the foundation of all. The questline that begins inside, it spends several hours demonstrating very quietly why that is true. There is a detail about Dinya Balu that the questline leaves mostly implicit, but that rewards attention. She receives visions. These visions are specific enough that she knew you were coming before you arrived. Not you specifically, perhaps, but the kind of person you are, the kind of person who would stop at Mara's temple in a city like Riften and actually listen. Mara chose her as a vessel for these particular instructions because she was the person who would hold them carefully until the right moment. She has been holding them for a while. She does not say how long. But when she speaks to you about the love offerings, there is the quality of a person delivering a message that has been waiting for its recipient, and the relief in her voice when you agree to carry it is the relief of someone who was not entirely sure the recipient would come. Consider for a moment what this questline looks like from Mara's perspective, insofar as the perspective of a divine can be approximated. She is the goddess of love and compassion, which means she has been watching from the beginning of every one of the situations this questline asks you to address. She has watched Jofthor's fear harden around his daughter's happiness like a shell that was meant to protect and has instead become a cage. She has watched Ruki's spirit refuse to leave the world without knowing what happened to Fenrig. She has watched Fenrig's spirit do the same thing in the plains near Juka's monument. She has had, presumably, a clear view of all of this for however long these situations have persisted, and she has not intervened directly. She has waited for the right kind of person to walk through the door of her temple in Riften and say yes. This is what divine patience looks like in the Elder Scrolls framework. The divines do not act for mortals. They act through them. The questline is not about Mara fixing broken hearts. It is about a mortal choosing to carry Mara's intentions across the whole of Skyrim, on foot, through weather and danger, because someone asked and the asking was genuine. The Ivarstead section is the questline's most narratively generous, in the sense that it gives every character involved enough space to be understandable. Fastred is not simply a young woman in love. She has thought about what she wants with the seriousness of someone who grew up in a declining village and knows what staying means and what leaving means, and has made her choice. Bassianus is not simply a romantic rival to a local man. He is someone who came to Ivarstead from somewhere else and stayed because of her, which says something about the depth of his commitment that a lot of men who have lived in the village their whole lives have not demonstrated. And Jofthor's opposition is not simply stubborn parenthood. It is grief, partly. The grief of a father watching his child prepare to leave, which is a grief that does not get easier for being universal. The questline gives you multiple ways to address his grief. The gentlest approach, if you have the patience for it, leaves him sad but not broken, and leaves Fastred genuinely free, rather than free by defiance. The Dukar's monument section is the Questline's most precisely felt sequence. The monument commemorates an ancient battle, and Ruki has been waiting at it in ghostly confusion for an indeterminate span of time, searching for Fenrig among the ruins of a conflict she cannot quite perceive has already ended. She thinks she is still alive. She thinks he is simply lost somewhere in the melee. What she does not know is that Fenrig died before the battle even started, cut down in an ambush while the army camped nearby, and that his spirit has been waiting in the open plain east of the monument, not far away in physical terms, but completely invisible to her without intervention. When you bring Fenrig back to her and they see each other, you are ending two separate vigils simultaneously. Two people who thought they were waiting alone, discovering that neither of them was ever really alone. They just could not see each other from where they were standing. The specific separation between Ruki and Fenrig, the fact that neither one knows the other is still there, still holding on, is the Questline's most quietly devastating detail. The loneliness of each ghost vigil is complete and private. What you bring them is not resolution of grief, but the end of ignorance. The knowledge that the other person was there, that the love was returned all the way through, that neither one left alone. When they rise into the sky together, it is not a dramatic ascension, it is simply departure. The thing that had kept them in the world is resolved, and they go. The blessing of Mara you receive, at the Questline's conclusion, reduces the cost of restoration magic, which is Mara's domain. It is, in its quiet way, the most appropriate reward in the game. You have been doing restoration work for the entire Questline, not healing wounds, but restoring the conditions under which people and ghosts can actually move forward. The blessing simply makes official what was already true. Laid to rest. The road into Mortal usually comes from the south, through the marsh, where the water is the colour of old pewter, and the tree roots emerge from the ground at wrong angles, as if the earth is slowly trying to push something out. Most players who come here are passing through on the way to somewhere else, or following a bounty into the surrounding swamp, or here for the first time and not yet sure what they are going to find. They pass through quickly. The weather in Morthal is rarely good. The city is small, and its atmosphere, even by Skyrim standards, which are not cheerful, tends toward a melancholy that is hard to explain, but easy to feel. Morthal is a city that has been living with something wrong for long, enough that the wrongness has become part of its texture. What most players do not stop for is the burned house. There is a ruined building on the edge of Mortal, its timbers still dark with ash, and if you approach it, you will notice a ghost, a child. She is playing near the ruins of what used to be her home, moving through the patterns of childhood games in a place that burned, which is perhaps the strangest image in a game full of them. Her name is Helgi, and if you speak to her, she tells you she wants to play hide and seek. She says she has a secret, and she will tell it to you if you find her. She will be easier to find after dark. This is the beginning of Laid to Rest, and it is one of the most genuinely unsettling quests in Skyrim. Not because it deploys horror mechanics with particular sophistication, but because of what it does with grief and community, and the specific violence of secrets that everyone knows, but no one will name. Helgi's secret, when you find her, hiding place in the cemetery at night, is that she did not die alone. The fire was not an accident, and the person responsible for it is still in Morthal, moving through the market and the streets and the conversations of an ordinary day. The investigation that follows has a rhythm that most Skyrim questlines do not attempt. You speak to the people of Mortal, and they are all, in different ways, already unsettled. Something has been wrong here for a while. long enough that the wrongness has become normalized, which is its own kind of horror. The Jarl, Idgrod Ravencrone, knows more than she is saying. She receives visions, and her visions are not comforting, and she manages them by going very still and waiting for the worst to pass. The citizens are afraid of Hrogar, the man whose wife and daughter died in the fire, who moved in almost immediately afterward with a woman named Alva. Alva is beautiful and composed, and slightly wrong in a way that everyone has noticed, but not quite been able to articulate. She is too interested in certain things. She is not interested enough in others. She is, in the way of certain predators, too good at appearing to be what she is not. What you discover piece by piece is that Alva is a vampire who placed Hrogar under her thrall before the fire. Hrogar, mesmerized and compliant, was present when his wife and daughter died, likely played an active role in ensuring that fire started and spread correctly, while not being in any meaningful sense himself. The man who called his daughter's name on ordinary mornings, who ate breakfast with his wife, who knew the weight of their laughter and the smell of their cooking. That man was already gone, replaced by something that operated his body under Alva's direction. He has no memory of what he did. This is the worst part. Alva serves Movarth, a vampire of exceptional age and capability, who has made the swamps outside Morthal his base of operations. He has been present in this region for longer than anyone living has known. He has been feeding carefully, taking small amounts from scattered sources across the surrounding area, maintaining a kind of steady-state predation that does not create bodies so much as it creates people who are a little pale, a little tired, a little more prone to staying inside after dark. Morthal's general melancholy is not unrelated to his presence. He has been the tonal background of this city for a long time. Movarth's lair is one of the better designed dungeon environments in the game. It is atmospheric in a way that rewards slow movement. The vampires inside are organized with the specific efficiency of people who have been working together for a long time under a competent leader. Movarth himself, when you find him, is distinguished by what his dialogue reveals. He is genuinely ancient. Ancient in the sense that most of human history as Skyrim's lore reckons it has occurred within his lifetime. He is not surprised to see you exactly, but he is surprised to have been found. He has been careful for centuries. He thought Morthal was safe because Morthal was small and forgettable, and no one with resources came here. Alva's journal, which you recover as part of the investigation, is the Questline's most chilling text. It is written in the voice of someone who views the people around her as resources to be managed. She writes about Hrogar's wife and daughter with the same tone she uses to write about adjusting her feeding schedule. They were complications. They have been resolved. She writes about Morthal's citizens as a portfolio, each one with a status, a value, a projected useful duration. The specific cadence of her writing suggests she finds this kind of accounting genuinely satisfying. Hrogar, freed from thrall after Alva's death, does not become a grateful beneficiary. He becomes a haunted man. His mind clears, and what it clears into is the knowledge of what he was, while it was unclear, which is not something that can be processed in a single conversation or a single night. His subsequent dialogue is the dialogue of someone trying to determine what responsibility means when the body that committed certain acts belongs to you, but the will that directed them did not. This is not a question the game answers. It is a question the game asks and then leaves sitting. Helgi's ghost does not appear again after the questline concludes. She was 10 years old. She spent her ghostly existence playing in the ruins of her home and waiting in a cemetery for someone to find her so she could tell them what happened. She did what she could with what she had. The questline also leaves one thread that is never quite resolved, and this is intentional in the way that only the best horror writing is intentional. Alva's Operation Immortal was larger than what you uncover. Her journal references contacts in other cities, other arrangements, other sources being managed. Movarth was one node in something that extended beyond the swamp. When you leave Morthal after the quest concludes, you have solved the specific problem. You have not solved everything. Somewhere in Skyrim, beyond the margins of this quest line, the edges of what Alva was building continue to exist, unmapped and unnamed. The game does not follow them. It just lets them sit there at the edge of what you know, which is where they were always going to sit. Some players cry at this quest line. Some do not. All of them walk a little more carefully through places where the houses are dark. Movarth's history, which you can piece together from the fragments in Alva's journal and in the context of certain texts elsewhere in Skyrim, is worth dwelling on. He was not always a vampire. He was, in another life, a skilled and respected vampire hunter, one of the best in his era, trained in a methodology documented in texts that still circulate among those interested in such things. He was exceptional at his work, precisely because he was willing to think like the things he hunted, to understand their methods from the inside, and at some point, in some encounter that the texts are not precise about, the understanding became something else. He was turned. The hunter became the hunted thing. Everything he knew about how to find vampires, everything about their methods and their patience, and their way of constructing stable environments for extended predation. He kept all of that. He applied it. Morthal is the product of a very skilled former vampire hunter who decided that the skills transfer equally well to the other side of the work. This is not stated explicitly in the questline. It is there to be found if you do the reading, if you take the time that most players do not take to understand who exactly you are walking into Movarth's lair to confront. But the reading changes the confrontation significantly. The lair's organization, the way the vampires inside are positioned, the efficiency of the feeding arrangements, the care taken to make Morthal's degradation gradual enough to be unremarkable, is not accidental. It reflects expertise. You are fighting someone who has been doing this for a very long time and knows exactly how to do it, because before he was doing this, he was stopping people who were doing this. The specific choice to locate his lair in the swamps near Morthal also reflects planning. Morthal is small. Small cities have less institutional capacity for recognizing and responding to problems. The city's Jarl is mystically inclined in a way that makes her governance unconventional. The guards are manageable. The citizens' threshold for noticing wrongness has been raised over years by the slow, constant pressure of Movarth's presence. He chose this city like a craftsman, choosing the right material for a specific purpose. Hrogar's situation, returned to briefly, deserves more consideration than the questline forces you to give it. The Tishui's specific mechanism by which Alva controlled him, the vampire's ability to place a thrall, is one of the most disturbing elements of Skyrim's vampire lore because of what it implies about identity and consent, and the question of what responsibility means when the will that directed your actions was not yours. Hrogar did not choose to betray his family. He did not choose anything. He was rendered incapable of choice by something external, and the body that carried out certain acts belongs to him, but the decisions did not, and yet the acts occurred. The fire burned. His daughter died calling for him. His wife is gone. The community that surrounds him knows what happened in the broad strokes, and what they know is that Hrogar's house burned and Hrogar immediately moved in with the woman, who, it now appears, made the house burn. He cannot explain this in a way that resolves the community's perception. The full truth of what happened to him is not a story that Skyrim's social structures have much machinery for processing. The guards understand crime and punishment. The Temple of Kinnereth addresses illness and recovery. Nobody in Morthal has a framework for what Hrogar went through, and so the framework they apply is the one available, which assigns him a degree of responsibility he did not have, and a guilt he may or may not feel, and a status in the community that will not improve regardless of what you proved in Movarth's lair. The questline lets this sit without resolution, and the letting sit is intentional. Helgi is gone, truly gone after the quest concludes. Hrogar is alive in Morthal with a life that has been structurally destroyed by what was done to him. Movarth and Alva are dead. The operation is ended. The community is safer. And none of this produces a healed wound, only a closed one. And the difference between those two things is the distance between what quests can accomplish and what people need. The Jarl's involvement, or near involvement, deserves a note. Idgrod Ravencrone has visions. She tells you this. She says her visions are not comfortable things, and that she manages them by going very still and waiting for the worst to pass. She knew something was wrong in Morthal. She knew it in the specific way of someone who receives information through channels that cannot be cited or verified or acted upon through normal institutional processes. She knew it the way you know something in a dream that you cannot carry back across waking. The questline implies she has been sitting with this knowledge for longer than she would prefer to say. Her willingness to let you investigate is the action of someone who has been waiting for someone who can act on what she cannot act on herself. And her subsequent dialogue, after the quest concludes, has the quality of a person who is relieved and grateful and slightly exhausted in equal measure. She does not say any of this directly. She is a Nord Jarl, and Nord Jarls do not typically discuss the texture of their premonitions with passing adventurers, but it is there in the pauses, in the specific way she received the news of what was in the swamp. She knew. She just needed someone who could go into the dark and do something about it. The Forsworn Conspiracy. To understand why the Forsworn Conspiracy questline is missed by so many players, you have to understand what Markarth looks like from the outside. It looks like a city, a functioning, if austere city, built into the cliff face of a steep ravine in the Reach. Its Dwemer architecture giving everything a solidity and permanence that many other holds lack. The stone buildings have been here for longer than the people in them. The smelter fires have been burning in some form since before the current inhabitants' grandparents were born. You can trade there, train there, pick up contracts and deliver goods. It functions, and if you walk into Markarth and simply do what Markarth seems to want you to do, buy things, sell things, ask about work, you will leave having had a perfectly ordinary Skyrim experience, and you will never know what you walk through. What you walk through is a city that has been burning for decades, quietly, from the inside out. The questline begins with something you might see just by walking through the marketplace. A man accuses a woman in the market of being a Forsworn spy. There is a scuffle, rapid and confused, and someone dies in front of you before you fully understand what is happening. This is not a staged introduction to a quest. It is an ambient event that can occur while you are simply passing through on your way somewhere else. If you help the dying man, if you pick up the note he drops, if you follow the thread that begins unraveling from that single death, then you are inside the Forsworn Conspiracy, and there is no gentle way out. The Forsworn are the Reachmen, the original people of the Reach, the province around Markarth, who have lived in these mountains and this rugged wilderness since before the Nords arrived. Their presence in the hills and the caves is not random banditry by any coherent reading of the lore. They are an occupied people conducting an insurgency in their homeland. The Markarth incident, the event roughly 25 years before the game's present, in which Ulfric Stormcloak led Nord forces to retake the city from a brief Forsworn occupation, is referenced throughout the Reach, and depending on who is talking, it was either a necessary military operation or a massacre. Both versions are true in the way that most military operations are both necessary and massacres. The investigation takes you deeper into Markarth's power structure than any player expects a city quest to go. The Silverblood family's control, which appears as background texture in casual interactions, in the way guards speak about the family, in the way other merchants lower their voices when the family's business comes up, becomes fully visible. Thonar Silverblood's involvement in the events you are unraveling is direct and specific. He has been using the Forsworn not merely as enemies to suppress, but as tools. A controlled insurgency that keeps the city afraid and dependent on Silverblood security, while also, when necessary, eliminating business rivals or political complications through violence that can be attributed to insurgent activity rather than to him. The Forsworn, who believe they are fighting for their people's freedom, have been, in part, serving the interests of the most powerful Nord family in the Reach without knowing it. This is not presented as a simple betrayal of one side by the other. It is a situation too entangled for simple betrayal to capture. Thonar needs the Forsworn problem to remain a problem, not to be solved. Madanak needs the Silverbloods to maintain the arrangement that keeps him alive inside Sidna Mine, rather than executed. The arrangement serves both parties in ways that cannot be cleanly separated from the suffering it produces. Sidna Mine is one of the most audacious pieces of quest design in the game. You are arrested, framed, stripped of your equipment thrown in, and you wake up in a prison that is not really a prison, but a Silverblood labor operation. The supposed criminals are mining silver that goes directly into Silverblood coffers. You are expected to work, and inside the mine, among the prisoners, is Madanak, the king in rags, the last Forsworn chieftain from before the Markarth incident, who has been imprisoned here for over 20 years. He has been down here for 2 decades, and he has, somehow, turned that imprisonment into a survival. He runs his people inside the mine. He hears grievances and settles disputes and plans, slowly, for the day when circumstances change. Madanak is brilliant, dangerous, charismatic in the way of leaders who have survived by being impossible to, fully read, and he has spent 2 decades in a silver mine, becoming more patient than most people alive. His offer to help you escape is real, and his price is real. And what he asks of you places you clearly inside the moral landscape of the quest line, rather than observing it from outside. If you side with Madanak and help the Forsworn escape, you emerge from the mine through a passage that opens into daylight above Markarth, and the city is briefly, violently different. The Forsworn attack those they consider enemies before dispersing into the hills. Madanak gives you the armor of the old gods, an artifact with a history that this questline only partially explains. And then he is gone, back into the Reach, back to the war that has no clear ending. If you betray him and side with the Silverbloods, you emerge to a reward that feels hollow in direct proportion to how clearly you understood inside the mine what you just helped preserve. The Forsworn Conspiracy has no good ending in the conventional sense. This is not an oversight. The Forsworn problem in the Reach is structural, a consequence of conquest and suppression that goes back far enough that nobody living is guilty of its origin, but everyone living is implicated in its continuation. You can make choices inside it. You cannot resolve it. The war in the hills will go on. The Silver Blood family will continue. The Forsworn will continue fighting and dying for a homeland they have never stopped believing was theirs. What the questline gives players is something rare in open-world games. A political situation that does not have a hero solution. You are not going to save the Reach. You are going to move through it, as carefully or as carelessly as you choose, and the Reach will remember what you chose. There is a moment near the end of the Sidna Mine section, regardless of which side you choose, where you are standing in the mine's deepest passage, and the city of Markarth is directly overhead, separated from you by some thickness of stone and the entirety of the city's social infrastructure, and the specific quality of that distance between where you are and where the city believes itself to be is one of Skyrim's more effective pieces of spatial storytelling. Above you, in the markets and the corridors of Understone Keep, things are functioning normally. Transactions are occurring. Guards are walking their routes. The Silverbloods are managing their interests. And directly below all of it, in the dark, people have been living in a version of Markarth that the city above would prefer not to acknowledge. The mine is not a metaphor. It is a structural condition. It has always been there. But there is something else worth considering about the questline structure that goes beyond its moral complexity. The game traps you in Sidna Mine after your arrest, and the design of that sequence is not accidental. You have been in Skyrim's other prisons. You have probably paid fines and walked out. You have probably used the Thieves' Guild, or your level, or your sheer accumulated capabilities to make imprisonment an inconvenience rather than a condition. Sidna Mine removes all of that. Your equipment is gone. Your gold is gone. The guards at the gate are Silverblood guards who answer to Thonar, and not to the game's general systems of law and consequence. You cannot simply decide to leave. You are in it until you get out through the mine, and the only path through the mine runs through Madanak. This is the quest line telling you something about what it is like to be the people whose lives are described in its first act. The farmers and merchants and tradespeople of Markarth who live under Silverblood authority are also in it until they get out, and the exits available to them are the exits that the Silverbloods permit. The brief experience of having your freedom contingent on the choices of a power structure that does not have your interests, at heart, is the quest line's most direct piece of communication. And it is delivered through mechanics rather than dialogue, which makes it harder to argue with. Madanak himself warrants more attention than the quest line's time constraints allow. He has been in Sidna Mine for over 20 years. Think about what 20 years in a silver mine does to a person. Or more precisely, think about what it fails to do to a person like Madanak. He has maintained not just his sanity, but his strategic clarity, his political vision, his ability to command loyalty, his understanding of how to use limited resources to produce maximum leverage. He has not become embittered in the way that breaks people. He's become patient in the way that sharpens them. His presence in the mine is still a presence. He holds court, hears grievances, makes decisions that affect the Forsworn prisoners, and, through them, the broader Forsworn network that still operates in the hills outside. And he has been governing from a cell for 2 decades. There is a specific speech he gives to you, depending on how you approach him, about the nature of the Reachman's claim to the Reach that is worth hearing all the way through. He does not claim the Reach on the grounds of grievance, though grievance is present in everything he says. He claims it on the grounds of history and presence. His people were there first. They are there still. And no political settlement that ignores this will produce a stable outcome, only a suppressed one. He has no illusions about what stability requires or what recovering the reach would cost. He is a man who has been thinking about this for 20 years with nothing else to do, and his analysis is thorough in the way of someone with no distractions. The guards of Markarth are a particularly pointed element of the quest line. They work for the Silverbloods in everything that matters, and the gap between their nominal function, upholding law, protecting citizens, and their actual function is visible if you pay attention. The law in Markarth is whatever Thonar decides it is. The protection being offered extends to people who benefit the Silverbloods and does not extend in equal measure to everyone else. When the guards arrest you on fabricated charges, they are operating in their actual capacity. The framing of this as unusual, as a betrayal of normal Markarth governance, is itself a piece of work, since normal Markarth governance involves exactly this kind of targeted use of nominal legal authority. Your arrest is unusual only in that you are the player character and not accustomed to being on the receiving end of what the questline's other characters experience as routine. The armor of the old gods that Madanak gives you on your way out of the mine deserves its name. It is old. It carries the specific age of something made in the Reach before Markarth was a city, when the Reachmen held the territory without contest. Its enchantments reflect a magical tradition that is older than the College of Winterhold's formal schools, older than the Thormor's preferred taxonomy of magical practice, rooted in the animistic and shamanistic traditions that the Forsworn maintain, and that Markarth's official culture has officially forgotten. Wearing it is a small statement. Madanak knows that. Kyne's sacred trials, high above the central holds of Skyrim, in the wind-battered territories where the game's density of cities and villages thins to almost nothing. There is a small altar. It is not marked on your map unless you know to look for it. It does not announce itself with a visible quest marker or an NPC waiting outside it. It is simply there in the wilderness, as certain things in the wilderness simply are. The altar belongs to Froki Wetted Blade, an old hunter who has removed himself from society entirely and lives alone in a hunting camp that suits his philosophy perfectly. He is not bitter about his isolation. He has not run from anything. He has moved toward something. He believes that the old ways of the hunt, the way of Kyne, the Nordic goddess of nature and the sky, who in Nordic theological tradition gave humanity the gift of the Thuum, are being forgotten, diluted by city living and Thalmor politics and the general tendency of people to get soft when they have walls around them. He practices those ways himself, with the consistency of someone for whom practice is not discipline but simply how he exists. When you find him, he offers to let you prove yourself in them. Kyne's sacred trials sends you to kill specific guardian animals in specific locations across Skyrim. Not ordinary animals. These creatures carry spiritual weight beyond their physical form. A guardian mudcrab on a coastal cave near Dawnstar. A guardian wolf in the wilderness northeast of Whiterun. A guardian skeever in the tunnels below Riften's roads. Guardian trolls, bears, elk, a hagraven. Dictium. List is specific, and the locations are distributed across the full breadth of the map, from the tundra near Whiterun to the volcanic terrain near Windhelm, to the dense pine forests of Falkreath. What makes this questline genuinely interesting is what happens after you kill each creature. A spirit appears, the spirit of the animal you have just killed, visible, hovering above its body, clearly present and clearly aware, and it speaks to you, not in the way Skyrim's other speaking animals speak. These spirits address you in the specific register of something that has been appointed to a task and has been waiting for someone appropriate to complete it. They are not angry about their deaths. They are satisfied. They were placed here. Being killed by someone worthy of the trial is the point of their existence, not a sad ending, but a fulfillment. The dialogue from these spirits is worth reading slowly. Each one says something that corresponds to the nature of the creature and the terrain it inhabits. The wolf spirit speaks about loyalty and the pack in terms that apply equally well to human communities, and just as easily to the kinds of bonds that the Civil War is currently destroying. The elk spirit speaks about stillness and patience in a way that would not be out of place in meditative literature. The mud crab spirit, which is by any objective measure the least dignified participant in this quest line, says something about endurance and adaptation that several players have quoted in context completely removed from Skyrim. The Hagraven spirit is the most complex encounter of the quest line. Hagravens are not natural animals, but corrupted mages who sacrifice their humanity, specifically the part of humanity that allows for normal human connection, in exchange for power. What the Hagraven spirit says about that trade is filtered through the lens of something that has had a long time to exist on the other side of that choice. She does not regret it. She does not endorse it. She describes it with the specific accuracy of someone who chose a thing with full knowledge and has been living inside the consequence, and has found the consequence bearable in the way she expected and painful in the way she did not. Froki receives your reports with the quiet approval of someone who expected this outcome once they decided you were worth asking. He does not celebrate. He nods and sends you to the next location. His relationship with Kyne is the kind of relationship that most religious figures in Skyrim claim but do not demonstrate. A practical partnership based on mutual expectation rather than devotion or supplication. He performs the trials. Kyne sends appropriate candidates. The arrangement functions. When the trials are complete, Froki presents you with Kyne's token, a ring that grants bonuses to archery and certain interactions with animals. The ring is not dramatically powerful by endgame standards, and this is probably why the questline is sometimes abandoned by players who begin it looking for significant rewards. But Kyne's Sacred Trials is not fundamentally about the ring. It is about the accumulated experience of walking across all of Skyrim alone, with a specific purpose that has nothing to do with war or politics or prophecy. Every guardian creature is placed in a habitat that reflects its nature. The mud crab in coastal caves, the elk in open tundra, the hagraven in the specific terrain hagravens are drawn to. Finding them requires paying the kind of attention to the environment that fast travel entirely eliminates. You have to walk. You have to notice when the forest changes, when the wind shifts, when the quality of the light through the trees is different from what it was a moment ago. You have to hunt. Froki says, early in the questline, that Kyne has been watching how people treat the land, not in the way of an angry god monitoring violations, but in the way of someone who gave a gift and wants to know if the recipient understands its value. Skyrim's landscape is extraordinary. The mountains, the tundra, the marshes, the dense pine forests of Falkreath Hold, the volcanic fields near Windhelm, the icy coasts of Winterhold. Most players move through it as travelers in a hurry. Kyne's Sacred Trials gives you a reason to move differently. The last spirit you speak to, after all the trials are complete, says something about what it means to be seen. Not celebrated, not rewarded in the conventional sense, seen. Acknowledged as present in the world in the specific way that Kyne's tradition acknowledges presence. by requiring something real from you and accepting that something real was given in return. It is, of all the questlines in this list, the most Nordic in the deeper sense, not in the sense of warriors and mead halls, but in the sense of a relationship between people and the landscape they inhabit, mediated by a goddess who understood that the land and its creatures are not backdrop but participants. The questline also does something quietly remarkable with repetition. You will have killed many animals by the time Kyne's trials are complete, in the ordinary course of surviving Skyrim's wilderness. None of those kills produced anything except materials and occasionally experience. The guardian creatures are different, not because they are more powerful, though some are, but because they are aware. They know why they are there. They know you are coming. The difference between an ordinary wolf encounter and a guardian wolf encounter is entirely about intentionality, entirely about whether both parties understand themselves to be part of the same transaction. Froki's questline argues that this difference matters, that how you approach the land and whether you are paying attention when you walk through it changes the nature of what you are doing there. Most players move through Skyrim's wilderness as travelers passing through. Kyne's Trials asks you to move through it as a participant. The land notices. Froki himself is a character whose apparent simplicity conceals considerable depth, and the questline benefits from going back to him between trials, rather than completing the full circuit and returning only at the end. He talks, not extensively, not in the open dialogue way of certain other Skyrim characters, but if you ask him about the trials while you are in the middle of them, he gives you context that shapes what you are about to experience. He tells you about each guardian animal, not in the mechanical sense of how to fight them, but in the theological sense of what they represent in Kyne's tradition and why they were chosen. This framing turns each encounter into something more than a combat challenge. The guardian bear, for example, is not simply a particularly strong bear in a significant location. In Froki's telling, it holds a specific aspect of what bears mean in Nordic spiritual life. Strength, without malice, the capacity for ferocity in defense of what matters, the willingness to be still for long periods in order to be genuinely present when presence is needed. When you kill it and the spirit appears, the spirit's words are an extension of that meaning, a final statement by something that existed to make exactly this point. The Hagraven trial is the most complex, and understanding it requires holding two things simultaneously. Hagravens are, on one level, enemies in the conventional Skyrim sense. Dangerous, aggressive, associated with dark magic, and the kinds of practitioners who value power over the costs of acquiring it. On another level, they were people. Women who chose a specific and irreversible transformation in exchange for specific magical capacities. The transformation severed their connection to ordinary human life and experience, to the attachments and vulnerabilities that the Forsworn, who work alongside Hagravens, consider the cost of being human. What the Hagraven spirit says in Kyne's trials is the most direct address of this transformation available in the game. Not a justification, not a condemnation, a description from inside, by something that remembers both sides of the choice and has developed a relationship with the consequences that is neither regret nor satisfaction, but something more complex than both. Kyne, in Nordic theological tradition, is associated with the sky, with storms, with the wind that carries weather from the Sea of Ghosts down across Skyrim's holds. She gave humanity the gift of the Thu'um, which in the Greybeard tradition was the original language of the world itself. In some traditions, she is equated with Kinnereth, the divine of air and nature, though the equation is contested by both Nordic and Imperial theologians, for reasons that are precisely the kind of reasons that would produce heated academic disagreement. What matters for this questline is her relationship to the land and the creatures in it, the idea that the natural world is not backdrop but participant, not resource but presence. Froki's entire life is organized around this idea. The trials are his way of preserving it and transmitting it to whatever individuals come through his hunting camp with the qualities the trials are designed to identify. What qualities are those? The questline implies them rather than naming them. Patience, since the guardian creatures are in specific distant locations, and reaching them requires walking rather than fast traveling. Attention, since their locations are not on the map, and finding them requires genuine observation of the landscape. Respect, which is harder to define mechanically, but which the spirit encounters make relevant. You are not simply collecting kills, you are completing appointments with beings that were placed there specifically for this purpose. And a willingness to receive information, since the spirits offer it, and receiving it means slowing down long, enough to read dialogue, in a game where many players have stopped reading dialogue after the first 100 hours. The cumulative effect of completing all of Kyne's trials, not the reward, but the experience of the full circuit, is something that players tend to describe in terms that do not usually apply to combat quests. They feel quieter afterward. They feel like they have been somewhere and done something that used a part of them that Skyrim does not usually call on. The Draugr dungeons and the Civil War quests and the dragon encounters call on reflexes and strategy and inventory management. Kyne's trials calls on something closer to patience and presence, and the quest line is rare enough in demanding those qualities that satisfying the demand produces a specific kind of satisfaction. Froki does not celebrate when you complete the circuit. He nods. He gives you the ring. He says something brief about what you demonstrated, and then he goes back to what he was doing before you arrived, which is sitting alone at his camp in the wilderness, listening for something most people are too busy to hear. Unfathomable Depths. There is a mine northeast of Riften, near the shores of Lake Honrich, that most players use exactly once. You go there for a fetching quest, collect what you need, and leave. The mine is called Avanshanzel, and it is a Dwemer ruin. Its geometry is the Dwemer geometry. All precise angles and bronze surfaces and the faint vibration of machinery that has been running without maintenance for longer than any civilization the surface world currently recognizes. What you will not notice, unless you look carefully at the entrance, is that there are ghosts. They appear as translucent echoes. An Argonian, a Khajiit, a Dunmer, a Breton, 4 adventurers who have clearly been here before and are clearly dead. They flicker. They speak in fragments. If you walk past them on your way to your actual destination, they vanish. If you stop, if you follow, they walk slowly into the ruins and begin acting out something. A sequence of events you do not initially have the context to understand. They are afraid. They have been afraid for however long they have been dead, and that fear has not resolved with their deaths. They are trying to complete something that ended very badly, and they cannot stop re-experiencing the attempt. This is the beginning of Unfathomable Depths, and it is told almost entirely in reverse. From Deepest Fathoms, the Argonian whose ghost you might first encounter inside the mine can also be found alive in a complicated, distressed sense, near Riften's docks. She is wandering the waterfront with a Dwemer artifact she cannot put down, and an expression of someone who has been trying to put it down for a long time. If you speak to her there, she gives you the lexicon and asks you to return it to Avanshanzel. She does not explain well. She is not in a state that allows for good explanation. But her urgency is real and specific in the way that urgency connected to actual events always is. The four adventurers, from Deepest Fathoms, Watches the Roots, Drennan, Briar, came to Avanshanzel weeks or months before your arrival, looking for the lexicon. It is a Dwemer artifact of significant scholarly value, a repository of knowledge encoded in a form designed to be read by Dwemer automata and to interface with certain other Dwemer devices across Skyrim and beyond. What the four adventurers did not adequately account for was that Avanshanzel is not an abandoned ruin in any complete sense. The automata inside are still active. The defenses are still running. The Dwemer built their installations to function in their absence, and the absence of the Dwemer has lasted thousands of years without the installations noticing. All four of them died inside. The dungeon is structured as a simultaneous present exploration and past revelation. You move forward through the ruin dealing with its active defenses, while the four ghosts play out the events of their last expedition around you. You see them making decisions that make sense in the moment, and that you can see, from where you are standing, lead to the wrong outcome. You see the specific moment when they begin to understand that the automata are responding to their presence as a threat. You see when they start running, and when they can no longer run. The ghosts are always slightly ahead of you, or slightly behind you, existing in a temporal layer just adjacent to the one you inhabit, and moving through the same spaces they moved through, watching them die while you navigate around their mistakes, creates genuine dramatic irony, which is rare in dungeon design. The lexicon's restoration to its pedestal, deep in a chamber that feels built for ceremony, even though no living Dwemer have been present to conduct ceremonies for millennia, has a quality of rightness that the questline earns through everything that preceded it. The automata do not cease hostility because you have completed your purpose. They are machines, and their programming does not include gratitude or recognition of fulfilled obligations. They simply continue operating as they always have. But the circuit has been completed, and the reward the game offers, a permanent skill bonus and the ancient knowledge ability, reflects a transaction that occurred at a level below the surface of the gameplay. From Deepest Fathoms, if you return to Riften afterward, is no longer there. Wherever she has gone, she was released from the specific compulsion that kept her returning to the water's edge with something she could not put down. Whether that release constitutes healing or merely the end of obligation is something the game does not resolve. The Dwemer questlines throughout the Elder Scrolls series are fundamentally about things that cannot be fully known, about a civilization so advanced and so strange that even the evidence they left behind raises more questions than it answers. What the lexicon contains, what the Dwemer were working toward with the specific project this artifact was part of, what they understood about the nature of existence that every subsequent civilization has failed to replicate. These are questions that Avanshanzel adds texture to without answering. You return the archive to the archive. The archive continues to exist. What the archive knows remains for now, encoded in a language that no one living can read. This is perhaps the most honest thing the Dwemer's ruins ever tell you. There is a dimension of the questline that becomes visible only when you consider the full arc of what From Deepest Fathoms experienced, the before as well as the after, the expedition as well as the compulsion. She came to Avanshanzel voluntarily. She was there by choice, with 3 companions who shared her interest in what the lexicon might be worth and what recovering it might do for their various careers and fortunes. The Dwemer ruins of Skyrim are full of people like her, adventurers, scholars, treasure hunters, individuals who heard about a specific artifact and made a reasonable calculation about risk and reward. Most of them die in the ruins. From Deepest Fathoms did not die there, which is the specific tragedy of her situation. She got out with the lexicon, which means she has been living since her departure in a state that is meaningfully worse than not getting out would have been. The compulsion that attaches to the lexicon is not fully explained in the questline, and this restraint is the right choice. The Dwemer built their artifacts to do specific things, and among the things they built some artifacts to do was to remain in contact with their intended locations, to maintain a connection that resisted displacement. From Deepest Fathoms feels this as an imperative that she cannot override. She cannot put the lexicon down. She cannot stop returning to the waterfront, drawn toward the direction of the ruin she stole it from. She is effectively tethered to Avanchanzel by the artifact's design, unable to move fully away, unable to return because the ruin's defenses killed everyone she knew, and she is not capable of navigating it alone. The ghosts of Watches the Roots, Drennan and Brea, share this situation with her from the other direction. They died in the ruin and have not been released from it. Their spirits replay the expedition's events, specifically the events leading up to their deaths, in a loop that is neither peaceful nor entirely aware of itself as a loop. They are stuck in Avanchanzel because something about the lexicon's unresolved displacement keeps them there, the way a debt keeps both parties bound until the debt is settled. When you return the lexicon and complete the circuit, the debt resolves. From Deepest Fathoms is freed. The ghosts presumably disperse. The Dwemer device that required the lexicon returns to full function. None of this requires any of the individuals involved. The Dwemer system does not know that From Deepest Fathoms is suffering. It does not know that 3 people are dead. It does not know or care that the Argonian at Riften's docks is standing in the water every morning trying to remember why she keeps walking to this particular place. The system was built to do something, and it continues doing it. In the absence of the civilization that built it, in the absence of any living operator, in the presence of entirely unintended consequences for entirely unrelated people. This is a very Dwemer outcome. Their creations did not include human costs in their design parameters, and the ruins of Tamriel are full of the results. Avanchanzel's automata deserve a note, because their design philosophy illuminates the broader Dwemer worldview in a way that the questline does not state but makes very available. They are effective defenders. They are not cruel. They make no distinction between a scholar studying the facility and a thief dismantling it for parts, because the distinction the Dwemer built them to make was simply presence without authorization versus absence. The 4 adventurers triggered the defenses. The defenses responded. There is no malice in what happened to them, and no mercy either. Only the execution of a function that has not been updated in thousands of years. The automata do not know the Dwemer are gone. They are performing their role without any ability to assess whether the civilization they protect still exists to benefit from that protection. There is something genuinely melancholy about this that goes beyond the deaths it causes. The dungeon itself is beautiful in the specific way of Dwemer architecture throughout Skyrim. The amber light filtering through structures that are simultaneously mechanical and organic. The sound of functioning machinery that has been functioning without anyone to hear it for millennia. The precision of the engineering everywhere you look. Walking through Avanchanzel with the ghosts playing out their last expedition around you is one of the more atmospherically rich experiences Skyrim's dungeons offer. The parallel timelines, yours moving forward through the ruin, theirs moving toward the end they already reached, create a specific quality of dread that the dungeon exploits well. You know what happened to them. You can see it happening. And you are inside the same architecture, dealing with the same defenses, making choices they made in their sequence, and trying to make them differently. The Dwemer lexicon, held in your inventory while you work your way through the ruin, has a quality that the game cannot quite render, but that the questline implies. It is full. It contains an enormous amount of encoded knowledge that will, when returned to its pedestal, be available to the system it belongs to. What the system does with that knowledge, what the Dwemer network of artifacts and devices distributed across Tamriel actually uses the lexicon to accomplish, is not explained, and the lack of explanation is the right choice. Some things the Dwemer built are fully explainable. Others are better left in the category of things that function as intended, without anyone outside the civilization fully understanding the intention. The lexicon is in the second category, and the questline is comfortable with that. From Deepest Fathoms, after you speak to her near the docks and take the lexicon, does not follow you to Avanchanzel. She stays in Riften. This is notable. She is compelled toward the ruin in her unresolved state, but she does not need to accompany you to achieve resolution. Her part is to give you the lexicon and trust that it will reach where it needs to go. That trust, given to a stranger who walked up to her near the docks when she was barely coherent with the weight of the compulsion, is the most human moment in a questline defined by inhuman forces. The Cursed Tribe. The orc strongholds of Skyrim are easy to miss entirely. This is not accidental. They are not placed on the roads. They do not sit near fast travel markers or dungeon icons. They occupy middle distances, accessible by walking, but not by following any obvious path. And when you first approach one, the gate guard tells you to leave unless you can prove yourself bloodkin. The default relationship between the Dragonborn and the strongholds is one of mutual wariness, and most players, having been told to go away, go away. They are on their way to somewhere else. Largashbur, when you approach it from the road south of Riften, is under attack. Giants, not one giant, but several, surrounding the stronghold's walls in a way that makes clear they have been doing this for a while and intend to continue. The orc warriors inside fight back with a desperate effectiveness that tells you these are significant fighters who are nonetheless losing slowly in a way that suggests something important has been removed from them. Their courage is real. Something supporting that courage is not, that something is divine favor. Malakath, the Daedric Prince of Outcasts and the Orcs' patron deity, has cursed Largashbur. The curse is not dramatic in a visible sense, no plague, no obvious physical effect. It is subtler than that. Things that should work do not work quite as well. Fights that should be winning are lost. Hunts that should succeed come back empty. The general competence that defines orc warrior culture has been quietly, persistently undermined, in the way that a house whose foundation has been compromised eventually fails not in a single catastrophe, but in 100 small ways that mount. Chief Yamaz has failed in some fundamental obligation to Malakath's standard, and the giants are Malakath's instrument of correction. Atub, the stronghold's wise woman, is the one who helps you understand what is needed. She has been aware of the problem for longer than anyone else. Wise women in our culture interpret Malakath's will, and she has had a difficult few months of interpreting a will that is clearly displeased. She needs specific ingredients for a ritual to contact Malakath directly. The ingredients are not easy to obtain. She cannot go herself. The warriors cannot be spared from the walls. She needs someone from outside, someone who can move freely. She says please. It is a small thing to notice, but it matters. It is the specific pleas of someone who is used to having to ask people for things that are beneath their usual concerns, who has learned to frame requests in ways that make compliance seem reasonable to people with other priorities. Atub is very good at this. She has been practicing it for years in a culture that does not naturally orient toward asking her for her opinion. The ritual works, Malakath answers. His voice is distinctive among Skyrim's Daedric princes. Where others are grand or seductive or cold, Malakath's voice carries a specific personal contempt. He knows your name. He knows what Yamaz did and did not do. His disappointment in Yamaz is not abstract. It is the disappointment of a patron in a champion who had every resource available and chose comfort over obligation. He tells you what must be done. What Yamaz must do is recover a specific war hammer from the giant encampment at Fallowstone Cave. It is a task within his abilities. That is the point. He has the skills. He has the strength. He has everything he needs to complete this obligation. And he has chosen not to, because completing it requires going into danger and accepting the possibility of failure and death. And Yamaz has, somewhere in the past few years, begun choosing differently than Malakath's standard requires. He asks you to do it for him. He frames this as a tactical consideration, as pragmatic use of available resources, and the framing is not entirely dishonest. You are objectively capable, you are present, it would work, but it would not satisfy the debt. Malakath's demand is not simply that the hammer be retrieved, but that the chief retrieve it. The obligation is personal. The task and the person assigned to it are the same requirement. You can comply anyway. You can clear the cave while Yamaz follows at a careful distance. And at the end, in the cave's deepest chamber, he reveals that he intends to kill you and claim the victory as his own. He cannot allow a witness to how thoroughly he failed to be what Malakath requires. Malakath, watching, finds this decision unsatisfying in the extreme. Yamaz dies, not by your hand directly, though you may finish what begins, but because the weight of his own failure has been accumulating to this specific point for the entire quest line, and there is nowhere left for it to go. Malakath's response is instructive, precisely because of what it does not contain. He's not pleased. He is not satisfied in any way that resembles triumph or vindication. He is simply done with it. The problem has resolved itself in the only way it could, given what Yamaz had become, and his attention has already moved to what comes next. He tells you to give the war hammer to whoever the orcs choose as their next chief. In his terms, this is a very simple transaction. The orcs of Largashbur make their choice. It is brief and practical, as orc decisions tend to be. Atub watches. She says nothing during their deliberation. She has been holding this stronghold together through the extended failure of its chief, managing the gap between what Largashbur was supposed to be and what it had become, doing the work that the chief was supposed to do without the title or recognition that would go with it, because the alternative was watching it fall apart completely. And she will continue to do this work under the new chief, who will get the credit for the stronghold's recovery, as the new chief will deserve credit, but who will also, based on every structural reality of the quest line, continue to rely on Atub's competence without fully acknowledging it. Malakath, in his final address to you, grants his blessing. He also says something, in passing, about what it means to carry weight that others drop, about being the people who do what needs doing without recognition, who build what needs building and fight what needs fighting and are thanked, if they are thanked at all. with a nod before the conversation moves on. He does not say this with bitterness. He says it the way a person states a fact they have metabolized completely, that no longer has any sting because they stopped expecting the world to notice. It is, in its way, a theology. It is possibly the most honest theology in Skyrim. The cursed tribe ends without heroic triumph. The chief who failed is dead by his own failure. The chief who replaces him may do better or may not. Malakath's curse is lifted, but Malakath's standard remains, and meeting it has always been the work. The giants are gone from the walls. The stronghold will rebuild. Atub will continue doing what she has always done. Sometimes that is what resolution looks like, and it is enough. Malakath's theology, encountered through this questline, is worth sitting with after the quest concludes. He is often categorized alongside the Daedric princes as a being of malice and excess, grouped with Molag Bal and Mehrunes Dagon as part of the game's general hostile Daedric framework. But Malakath's domain is specific in ways that separate him from that company. He is the god of outcasts, of those who were rejected by the systems that were supposed to include them, of people who were promised something and not given it, and who built their lives anyway from what they could find in the places where they were thrown. The orcs were expelled from the main body of creation. Their patron deity was cast out of the Aldmeri pantheon, which maps onto the Orsimer being excluded from the political and cultural body of Tamriel's dominant peoples. And Malakath took them in and made their outsider status into a philosophy, into a standard, into a reason for living rather than simply a condition to be suffered. This is a more sophisticated theology than most of Skyrim's Daedric quests allow the relevant prince to demonstrate. Most Daedric quests are organized around the prince's characteristic vice, Sanguine's debauchery, Molag Bal's domination, Boethiah's treachery. Malakath's questline is organized around something closer to virtue, though it is a virtue that comes with its own specific demands. His standard is the standard of the excluded who refuse to be defeated by exclusion. The price of his favor is meeting that standard. Yamas did not meet it. The replacement chief will meet it, or will face what Yamas faced. There is something worth noting about the questline's refusal to give you a clear good versus evil structure. Yamas is not a villain. He is a man whose will was gradually eroded by circumstances he could not manage, who made a series of small compromises that accumulated into a failure of everything Malakath expects. His offer to have you clear the cave while he follows is not a sudden reveal of his true nature. It is the final expression of a tendency that has been building throughout the questline. He has been cutting corners. He has been minimizing his personal risk in ways that felt reasonable one at a time, and that, viewed together, constitute a fundamental failure of the obligations he accepted when he became chief. Malakath does not judge him for weakness in the abstract. He judges him for choosing comfort over duty in ways that were entirely avoidable. The giants attacking Largashbur are not punishment for losing a fight. They are consequence for not showing up to fight in the first place. Atub's position in the questline rewards extended attention. She is in a specific and difficult social location. A wise woman in a warrior culture, female in a patriarchy, the most spiritually informed person in the stronghold, and therefore the most isolated one. She knows what has been wrong with Largashbur for months. She has been aware of the divine displeasure accumulating, of the specific gap between what Yamas is supposed to be and what he has chosen to be. She has watched the consequences compound. She has said what she could say through the channels available to her, which are limited by her position, and she has waited for circumstances to force the situation to resolution. Your arrival is that resolution's mechanism. She needs you not because she lacks the knowledge or the spiritual capacity to address the problem. Her understanding of Malakath's requirements is precise and complete, but because she lacks the institutional authority to act on it alone. The wise woman does not challenge the chief directly. The wise woman finds the path through the circumstances that allows the situation to change without requiring her to step outside the social structures that, however imperfect, are the structures available. She does this with full understanding of what she is doing. She is working within a system that undervalues her in order to accomplish something the system needs and cannot accomplish without her. And she does this without bitterness, because bitterness would make it harder to accomplish anything. Malakath's final blessing, the specific moment where the Daedric Prince of Outcasts acknowledges what has been done to restore his favor, says almost nothing about Atub. It addresses the assembled stronghold, the new chief, the completion of the ritual. Atub stands nearby. She does not speak. She has been the engine of this entire resolution, and she receives no acknowledgement from the being whose requirements she understood and acted on throughout. This is not oversight on Bethesda's part. It is the Questline's most pointed observation about the structure it is examining, the specific way that women in warrior cultures do enormous work and receive specific calibrated credit, and the way that systems large and small sustain themselves through the labor of people whose contributions the systems do not formally recognize. Fallowstone Cave, where you escort Yamaz to his appointment with Malakath's judgment, is one of Skyrim's larger and more impressive giant encampments. The giants there are not aggressive in the initial approach. They respond to your presence with the wariness of creatures that are large enough to be confident about their position in a confrontation, but not so aggressive that they initiate without cause. Yamaz's plan to have you clear the cave is practical in the narrow sense of the term, and disastrous in every other sense, which is a description that applies to most of what Yamaz has been doing for the duration of his failure. The plan would work. The Warhammer would be retrieved. Nobody would be the wiser about how it was retrieved. Malakath would know, but Yamaz's operating assumption at this stage of his decline is that Malakath can be satisfied with results regardless of how those results were produced, which is approximately the most incorrect assumption available in the theological framework he is supposed to be working within. What Malakath requires is not the hammer. The hammer is the occasion. What Malakath requires is Yamaz, the real Yamaz, the one willing to accept the cost of leadership and meet it directly, without buffers, without someone between himself and the danger. That Yamaz has not shown up for a long time. He is not going to show up in Fallowstone Cave, and so something else happens instead.